There are many ways I can go about in creating this video. In fact, I've already recorded two. And there's many ways people can go about interpreting the world that they live in. In fact, there's hundreds and thousands and billions. There's many billions of different people. I would hope that everybody uses their own mind, because that would then mean that there are quite literally billions of different interpretations of the world. But many people choose to follow religions, sciences, governments, you name it, ideologies, to really put their worldview under an umbrella, to say this is what it is, it has to be structured this set way. Now, there are problems with this. There's collectivism, there's also just abandoning the individual. At the same time, you can see some sense of community, some sense of unity, and you see some, good things with it too. And you can just start breaking down every aspect of it. I'm not here to do that, but I wanted to create the disclaimer that you should always think for yourself, because you do have your own mind, and that you're listening to this video as your own being. Nobody's listening to it other than you. And to recognize you have self-ownership and you have your own mind means that you can never be a slave, and means that you're free. And if you recognize you can't do anything without freedom, and that freedom is the prerequisite for creativity and all things happiness and health and manifesting the life that you want to live, then it's something that you definitely want in your life. And so I think let's start with the basis of the disclaimer of we all generally want a better life for ourselves. We want to be healthier, we want to be happier, we want to live more morally. Right? So this is like a general human rule of survival and trying to get by, but also just maximize our evolutionary effort and, our life in general to be the best that we can be, right? Is always trying to improve, optimize, and find what's most sustainable too. Because there's many things where we recognize, okay, they're bad things, but they're bad things that are part of nature. And therefore, they're not really bad things. They're good things because we just learn to live with it. It's like you can't change everybody around you because they're going to be people. People are going to be people. You can try to change people, but in that process of trying to change people, it may backfire because people are going to be people. And you can educate them, you can help them, but you can't force it upon them, because that's when it actually becomes really counterintuitive, as we have seen all throughout history. People trying to say, this must be done, and if we don't get it done, this will happen. And they make all these threats, they create all this fear just to justify their will being imposed upon everyone else, and then you end up with all this catastrophe. And so, very big problem, but there's a lot of underlying philosophy that doesn't get seen. A lot of you might want to mention moral relativism. For instance, moral relativism is the idea that there is no such thing as right and wrong, and that people can basically do whatever they want. Yes, this is dangerous because it says, well, we don't care, essentially, about anything. It's just total carefreeness. Now, I have talked about the essential use of being carefree, that is, recognizing when to let go into nature. But that means letting go into nature, not letting go into society, not letting go into your whim all the way, but letting go enough so that way you can also still care in this universe. You want to have a balance. You don't want to be totally carefree or also super paranoid, worried about everything all the time. And so there's always nuances to things that we need to see within our lives, but there's also just a lot of hidden psychology and philosophy that we frankly just don't get taught in our world. And some people have to reformulate ideas to make it more digestible for individuals, and that's sort of what I'm proposing in this video, sort of getting to the point finally. The appeal to denature. The appeal to denature is an idea that I have formulated to represent, let's be honest, ideas that have been around for thousands of years, especially taught in Taoism, which is the idea that man can create an excuse to basically be God. And I'm going to provide 3 examples specifically in this video. But let's preface again the idea of the appeal to denature. Why do I call it this? Well, there's something called the appeal to nature. You may have not heard of this, but in philosophy, it's considered the idea that if you call something natural and you assume it to be healthy, that's just fallacious. So they call the appeal to nature a logical fallacy. Okay, so if you say something natural is healthy or natural is right, that's just wrong, because you can't just correlate the two. They're two separate things. And I agree with that, except when you understand Taoism or you understand naturosophy, these two other perspectives that can challenge that worldview, It says, wait, if you can define what nature is, and it correlates to what is good and what is healthy, then they're one and the same, and therefore you can make it, and it's not a logical fallacy. You can say what is natural is what is good, or what is natural is what is healthy, because you know what is natural, and you equate it to what is healthy, basically one and the same, equivalently so. And so in Taoism, for instance, they call nature Zuran, and they connect it to a concept called Wu Wei, which means effortless intelligence. And they call virtue, or what is right, as Ti, or Di in Chinese. Now, being someone from the West who's not Chinese, I have different ways of interpreting things, but it's essentially the same worldview. I say that, okay, what is natural is what supports or gives to one's nature. Nature has always existed. It's always been there. Okay, and I call that process of support also called naturalization or naturalizing. Naturalize, to make natural, to allow, essentially, to embrace, to allow nature to come to its own fruition, which again, from the Taoist point of view, Wu Wei, it means effortless, allowing nature to manifest itself just as the body can self-heal itself, especially when people fast and let things be. The world will just grow of its own self spontaneously without human input. And oftentimes we see this too, that when humans try to force everything in their environment, it becomes counterintuitive, it backfires. Whereas when people start to leave other people alone and let things play out, they get to live life more, experience life more, and life actually still manifests on its own. People still get done what needs to get done. They're just not adding bloat and stress and desires and attachments to the mix, which is very common as an addressing concern in Eastern philosophy, the idea of desire and attachment, and how much this puts a burden on our individual nature. Because we attach ourselves to material things and we say, we need this in our life and we can't live without this in our life. So this has a huge deal to do with then the inverse of the appeal to nature, which is the appeal to denature. Now, the appeal to denature is basically the unknowledgeable appeal to nature. So if an individual does go to the supermarket and just assumes, yeah, it's natural, so it must be healthy, maybe it actually is quite healthy, but what if it's not? And they just assume it is just because it says so. Well, then their lack of knowledge, their ignorance gives way to some evil that they're basically allowing, they're excusing. So this excuse for evil is essentially this appeal to denature. It's saying, well, nature is wrong. Nature has a lot of imperfections, and therefore we must perfect nature with our own creation. And because of all the problems in nature, and because nature's not always good, that justifies us then creating a whole new system, rebuilding the human body, creating governments that control the entire universe and tell other people to destroy other people's lives, to create involuntary interactions among the masses, in situations that would have never occurred on their own, having you to sign certificates and documents that you have to sign at birth, which you never would have had to do in nature or among normal human beings, having to see certain people as authority figures, which, I mean, they're just like you and I. They don't have any more special rights. They don't have any superhuman abilities. They claim to be of a certain bloodline. They claim to have certain, material things to make them look special. They have to wear a certain crown and uniform, but they're still just human. So they create an appeal to denature. They create the excuse to be God. They create the excuse for man-made authority. They don't want to respect and embrace and allow nature to manifest on its own. Or because nature has always been there. Your body, you were given since your birth. As you grow older, your mind develops. Now you can understand your own body to align further with it. You can't blame a child as they are developing their mind, and that's why they need guidance from an adult. But you can still blame them to the extent that they still are an individual being. Okay? But you recognize, okay, there are limitations. That's with your knowledge. You recognize, okay, for instance, a poisonous plant in nature. It's something that might be natural to exist, but it's not natural to use. Do we just call it unnatural altogether? Well, then somebody might start cutting it down, and now the environment starts suffering because of it. Because of our ignorance, because we don't see that it's natural to exist, but not natural for humans to use? What if it's natural for other animals? What if it's natural for certain things in the environment that then help us? We don't see that there's an interconnectedness within nature, and that there's certain things that humans have because it's their own human nature, and there's certain things animals have, other animals, because we're still an animal as well, that they have that we may not have. Some of them amazing stuff, and we want to say that we're like the most evolved species on Earth. I've talked about this before. Some of them have like night vision and able to hear and see far away, able to be more reactive, and that's amazing, right? Some of them have claws, their skin is more like tough to the sun, and they don't need to wear sunscreen or anything. I mean, even humans don't really have to wear sunscreen, let's be honest, because that is actually an example of an appeal to denature. Humans saying, well, there's no way that we can live with the sun and the natural elements. We therefore need to excuse the fact that we can create sunscreen for our skin problems, even though there might be higher knowledge that we're not seeing, such as the fact that our skin will naturally adapt and we don't have to expose ourselves 100% to the sun all the time, and that we can act intelligently and work with nature rather than working against it and trying to mask the problem with symptoms. We see this all the time in medical. The medical industry is administering drugs to people. Man-made drugs, which you can say are coming from natural sources. There's a reason why they're not considered natural medicine, guys. It's because they're taken out of their natural form. They're processed, and then they're thrown here with a cheaper price that they can be patented. Natural medicine can't be patented, and if natural medicine isn't taught by traditional allopathic medicine practitioners who are told just administer drugs and give them a pill if it says this person has this issue. It's very much based in ignorance. It's not looking at the individual and saying they have a nature of their own with their own body, their own interactions, and let's look at the whole body as well because that constitutes the whole nature, and then let's try to find out what's the root cause so we're not just treating the symptoms endlessly. This is a holistic worldview, and it is a worldview that works with nature. But the appeal to denature says, we don't need to look at that. We can administer this drug. We can have an excuse to say, oh, well, nature's not working. Well, we need man to fix it, so let's give him a vaccine. Let's give him this drug. Let's give him some sunglasses. Give him some sunscreen. On top of that, there's all these food problems in the world and food shortages, so let's process all the food and let's pump out processed food because this is how we're going to feed the populace. Oh, shoot, now everybody's getting sick and they're dying. Well, I guess that gives us another excuse to create more medicine. And do you see how this becomes more of a cycle and how this keeps toppling and toppling and toppling over each other? This is the appeal to denature. Let me give you 3 specific examples instead of just going on this rant that can just basically never end, which is a world, a society that we create for ourselves of this man-made thing justifies this man-made thing, justifies this man-made thing, when all the philosophies of the past tell us that contentedness is being content in our own minds and our own bodies with our natural selves, and finding that, the Taoists call it the uncarved block, Buddhists call it nirvana, and finding our true selves. So it's not like it's a new concept when I'm introducing. It's getting past these illusions, the mayas, the things that are limiting our worldview, that are basically pushing our nature down, and because we have all these burdens and responsibilities and attachments that are constantly bombarding on us. I need this phone with me. I need this drug. I can't live without this drug. Oh, I can't live without a ventilator. Now, this might sound controversial because people say, well, Corey, what do you mean? You don't want people to have man-made drugs. You don't want people to have governments. You don't want people to have ventilators. You don't want people to have phones. What are you talking about? If you're making that claim, you don't understand the point of this video. The point of this video is to recognize something higher, to recognize an authority higher than man. The same thing the abolitionists had to do in the 1800s to free humans from chattel slavery. They looked at chattel slavery and they said, okay, there is no natural benefit to this scenario. In fact, we can live completely without slavery. Okay, it's not natural to exist, it's not natural to occur because people have to be programmed into it. Naturally, they're born without chains on. Naturally, they're born not having to, have some allegiance to some system, to some people they don't know. Slavery is nonsense. And they saw it. It was like, it's clearly unnatural. It requires violence. It requires force. It requires training someone into subjection and then keeping them uneducated so they can't free themselves. clearly unnatural because now you're not supporting their nature. You're purposely pushing them down for your own benefit, for your own nature. And don't you recognize, again, everything in nature is connected, so don't be surprised when the slaves come back and they rebel, as they have many times in history before the end of chattel slavery. They had to rebel, they had to get arms, they had the abolitionists help them. That's why they called themselves abolitionists. They said, end it now, it's bad. Not because you can make some justification and say, oh, well, if we have slaves, we can create a better economic system and we can create all these better solutions in the world. No, ignore that. Who cares? Those are all just possibilities in the air of theory. What you are guaranteeing is the fact that somebody's being enslaved. You're guaranteeing that someone's being enslaved for the possibility of a better economic system. Nonsense. If it's a guaranteed wrong, get rid of it. The same way people say, well, we have to steal from all our neighbors, i.e. through taxation, for the government we have. Otherwise, we won't have roads, we won't have this. It's all up in the air. You know, a lot of that money goes to the politicians' paychecks, and it does not go to the services that you directly want. Why not just pay for the things that you directly want? And stop forcing people to pay for things that they don't want. That's how everything else works in the world. Why create an exception to that? Why guarantee a wrong action for the possibility of something good? People don't want to understand this logic, and so they make an appeal to denature. This is so dangerous. It's more dangerous than moral relativism because it's people who may even think that they're doing right when they're doing wrong. So they might even care about right and wrong, but because they have so lacking knowledge of the holistic worldview and being able to see the bigger picture and the roots and the sources to what things are, they aren't able to recognize the higher authority, which is nature. And if they do respect that higher authority, they would not proclaim to have the right to rule over their fellow man or enslave their fellow man or tell their fellow man what to do, or even their own body. They would respect their own body's nature and say, I'm not going to tell my body what to do necessarily. I'm going to work with it. Because my mind is not my body. My body has many different organs and my mind is just one part of it, which again, Eastern philosophy says, hey, the mind can get in the way of our own nature here. That's why we fall to desires and attachments. Guess what? That's why you got to clear the mind. You got to go back to the uncarved block, okay? Again, this is what they called it. So let me go to these specific examples, because like I said, I can go on forever. A phone, as simple as a phone. Guess what? It's an excuse to not be with others. It's an excuse to not enjoy life. Isn't that funny? Oh, but a phone allows us to be more in contact with each other, allows us to be safer. Yeah, it also gives you an excuse maybe not to be safer. There's people who walk with their phones in the streets and they get ran over by cars because they're distracted. Now, that's just one example, not maybe a good example. A better example, okay, I go to the beach all the time. There's people who, okay, there's a sunset happening. I got to get my phone out, got to take a picture. Okay, it lasts, great. Okay, cool. But some of them hold their phone up the entire time. Do you have eyes for a reason? Like, do you have like a memory to cherish the moment? You know, are you really present with yourself? Like, what's the point of taking the photo? Is it for you to like look at later and like say, okay, well, I was here? Or is it to like brag to others for some identity that you create for yourself? Why do you create that identity? You would never ask those questions unless you recognize the higher authority. You recognize there's something other than the phone. There is your eyes. And you recognize that your presence is beyond the future and the past because it's what you have right now. It's what you are doing right now. And you giving me your time and attention through the screen, you should recognize the limitations of that screen. It's not reality. What you see may not be real, and especially as AI develops, you're not going to know what is real. That doesn't give humans an excuse to just say, well, it doesn't matter. Because if they don't care about what is real anymore, are they really going to have real love or true love, as people call it? Are they really going to have those deep moments in life that most people consider to be the most important moments in life? And yet they say that they create these things to create those moments. But yet those very things limit and prevent those moments. People say they desire something, they get that thing, it doesn't make them happy, and so they desire more. You ever wonder why it's just a never-ending loop, the hedonic treadmill? It's because they've built a trap for themselves. And that trap, you can say it's with the mind, as in Eastern philosophy, but I'm saying it's also very much the appeal to denature. Humans getting in their own way of nature. Humans not recognizing their own ignorance. Recognizing that they're ignoring their own eyes when they're using the phone. That they're ignoring their own presence. And so this is just one example. And take, for instance, people used to have house phones, home phones, and then it turned into smartphones. And you can see there's problems just in that transition. But even with the home phones, there's a problem because many people, and you can talk to the older folks and they'll say this, okay, back then it was very inviting. The neighborhoods were more active. People were more about talking to each other face to face. Well, guess what? People are no longer talking to each other face to face. People are suffering from loneliness. People are suffering from, virginity at this point. No, everybody is having trouble in this world, even older populations, because they let it happen. They allowed this appeal to denature, and then if they say, well, I'm against it, now say, what are you going to do? Go against the present time? I'm not asking for you to go against the present time. I'm asking for you to help the world see the bigger picture and see what was there all along, but you have to act by example. You can't just tell everybody else, oh, these darn phones, all this darn generation, look at them going again, getting distracted, getting themselves into a mess. I mean, I can sound like that quite a bit sometimes. But the truth is, you can complain all you want, that's just the nature of innovation. Things are going to change. But with that innovation, if you don't recognize its problems, it's going to kick humanity in the butt. And that is what has happened with the fertility. That's what has happened with our health. That is what has happened with our social, culture, everything. Okay? Is with the appeal to denature, we've allowed ourselves to destroy ourselves. Because we claim that we are essentially above nature and we should just, try to manifest things with force. We're not trying to manifest things with wu-wei or effortlessness because we have it in our ability to talk to each other face to face, but we choose not to. We choose to use a phone instead because it's more convenient. And because we use that more convenient tool, guess what? We just lost what we've had for thousands of years. Now, like I said, it could be further helped, but it can only be helped if you still recognize that natural thing underneath. If you still recognize the root, if you still recognize why you're doing it. But people lose sight of why they're doing it. Soon, a ventilator, a phone, just becomes part of daily life. It just becomes another organ, and nobody ever knew what was there before because they never experienced it. They never saw it. And then nobody was ever alive to share their experience about it. That's how dangerous the appeal to denature is. And it's dangerous, it really just is life. I could say it's dangerous only because I think people will be missing out on life. Coming from the point of view of myself, I'm going to say, hey, there's this greater life that people can be missing because they choose to be living in their illusions. And, we all partake in certain illusions, many of which we accept willingly, even knowing that they're illusions. So the key, though, is knowing that they're illusions, because then you can say, okay, well, it's my fault. I chose not to talk to this person face to face, and so I chose not to have a human interaction. I accept the responsibility. At least if you accept the responsibility and you know what you're doing to your nature, that's a good start. It's like, for instance, if you were lying to yourself or lying to other people, the first step to being honest is being honest with yourself and admitting to the fact that you were lying, admitting to the fact that you were partaking in an illusion. That's the only way you're getting out of it. Okay, so there's the phone example for you. Here's a really good one, a ventilator, because people will mention this too. You say, well, okay, Corey, if we don't have a ventilator, people can't breathe, and ventilators save lives. But my question is, why are people not breathing in the first place? A ventilator is not natural to exist, although it's natural to use. Why do I say that? It's because, it's not something that nature provided. It's something that we created as a result of a problem that doesn't need to be there. And so we say it's natural to use because it helps us breathe. It helps our nature. So great, we have ventilators. But guess what? If you say it's natural to exist, we're dependent on it. You're saying that we need it to exist. You're saying it's part of nature. And now everybody says, okay, it's perfectly fine if everybody's on ventilators, because you know what? It helps their nature. Guess what? It's not fine, because underneath the ventilator is your natural breathing. And so only an appeal to denature would say, okay, guess what? Humans aren't breathing, so that justifies us creating a ventilator. Whippy, guess what, guys? Now we're breathing. Yeah. Oh, guess what? Oh, we have cancer? Darn it, man. You know, nature, man. Nature did it. Ah, man, everything is unnatural. Everything is destroying us. The environment, everything is poisoning us all the time, so I don't need to worry about it. Everything's spying on us. I don't need to worry about it. The excuses people make. So then they can justify more of that behavior. They condition themselves to it, to say, okay, well, it's fine. Okay, so the ventilator's fine. Okay, so the smartphones are fine. Okay, so the sunglasses are fine. Even though it might block our pineal gland and weaken our organs over time, we won't see it until nature tells us over time, unless you listen to people who give you warnings like this. This is a warning. The appeal to denature, understanding it, is the warning. Not understanding it is basically just the ignorance that is partaking in it. Partaking in the appeal to denature is partaking again in the unknowledgeable appeal to nature, which can only be solved by the knowledgeable appeal to nature, that is the individual who wants to harmonize their life with nature and other human beings, as they are also part of nature. They want to harmonize with themselves and others. There's no incomplete picture here. They want good interactions, healthy interactions all throughout their life. They're not justifying any wrong whatsoever because it's wrong. Wrong is wrong. That's it, period. There's no necessary evil. It's a contradiction of terms. If you say it's a necessary evil, you say it's a natural evil, a natural unnatural. It doesn't make any sense. A natural unnatural. Huh? Right? So you can really go down this rabbit hole and you can say, looking at anything, what's the limitations, what's the source, what's the roots, and you can then recognize something higher. I mean, it's as simple as a glass, okay? It's as simple as a fork and a utensil. Okay, it helps us eat. Guess what? Now we're less in touch with our food. We're not touching it with our hands, which, by the way, can moisturize us, some of the food we eat. And maybe some of these glasses are leaching plastics into the food. You know, and it's like, no wonder why people start saying everything is poisonous around them, because when they do start looking at everything around them and they say there's ingredients in this, there's this and that, and there's cancer everywhere, they're going to become very paranoid. And I'm not asking you to be paranoid. I'm asking you to return to your simple, unprocessed state, which, again, the Wu Wei perspective says do nothing, basically, act effortlessly. So you're not actually worried. You're just letting the things manifest on their own. That's letting nature happen. It's actually simpler than being paranoid. It's simpler than trying to change everything in the universe or trying to go with the flow of society. Because if you go with the flow of society, you'll find out you're living in contradiction with yourself. You'll find out you'll be living a lie. But if you allow nature to do what it does and humans to be who they are, you're allowing honesty. And honesty is the key to essentially this harmonization with nature. That's why I created a book specifically on honesty. It's just an easier way to understand this whole concept. So make an appeal to nature every day, as most people already do when they make choices in their life. I choose to do this, I choose not to do this. So they're saying something is right and something is wrong. You do it every day. Okay, so nobody actually is a moral relativist. People just don't have a lot of knowledge behind their actions, thus they may be partaking in wrong that they are unaware of. And that, to some extent, because they're unaware of it, isn't so much their fault. But if they want to be unaware of it, then it is their fault. They're creating an excuse to be ignorant, an excuse to not use their nature. Again, it's an appeal to denature. So let me repeat the understanding that the appeal to denature is way more dangerous than moral relativism. And it is the root cause to, I would say, all human suffering, because it's the same understanding that Buddhism and Taoism and a lot of Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, Socrates talks a lot about this too, where we recognize we're departing from who we are meant to be. And who are we meant to be? Well, nobody is to say. What is actually right in this universe? Well, under what circumstance, under what condition, right? It's all about knowledge. As Socrates says, the only good is knowledge, the only evil is ignorance. And recognize that knowledge starts, too, with recognizing the things that you may not be able to know, or seeing the things that you do not currently know. That is seeing the yin and the yang, right? You can see there's a mat behind me. There's the yin, there's the yang. The yin you don't see. Doesn't mean it's not there, just because you don't see it. There's always more you don't see, and that humbles ourselves, and that makes us have further humility to say we should not impose our will on others, should not try to control everything in our environment. We should try to learn from nature and respect it to abide to it. Thank you very much for watching. This is Corey Angelot. Nature is the answer.